Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday Social with me, Anna Hudson, aka Miss H Teachers. Thank you so much for listening today. Whether it's live or downloaded, it's absolutely fantastic to have you here, and I really hope that you enjoy today's show. I am so excited to be back, and this show in particular is one that is really, really close to my heart and something that I'm really, really passionate about. Before we start though, however, I just want to give a little trigger warning. We are going to cover some challenging topics today, particularly around mental health and addiction. These are important topics, and they're topics that we as teachers and educators are facing daily. However, as educators, we need to be mindful of our own mental health, as well as those of our students, our families and communities. So if you are listening along today, please just make sure that you have a little check-in with yourself. Make sure that you are okay. It's really, really important that you take care of yourself as well as others. So before I begin, I'm going to start the way that I always do, with a little group check-in. How are you today? And how has your week been? Are you fully back into the swing of school, or are you just about to head back? What's one positive from the last week that you've taken away? And what's one thing that you're looking forward to this week? Whatever your plans for today or even the week, I really hope it's a good one. Thank you so much for listening to Teachers Talk Radio, and we're really looking forward to getting started with today's show. Please remember to be kind to yourself and to reach out if you need support. So thanks for tuning in. And I just want to say a huge thank you before we begin to our sponsors. So today our show is amazingly sponsored by a number of companies. We've got John Catt. This show is brought to you in partnership with them, John Catt Educational Publishers, of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your first order. Also, a huge thank you to Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident lifelong readers? Well, join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosson, and the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk to grab your free ticket. And we're also sponsored today by Easy For You, who are empowering education where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience. By eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support and embracing technology, Easy For You isn't just providing tools, they are shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy For You, transforming education one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school. And finally, Apps for Good. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. A huge thank you to our sponsors today, because this show wouldn't be as fantastic as it is without them. So, moving on to today's show. Vapes, drugs and risk-taking behaviour. Is it getting worse? This is a topic that I am absolutely passionate about. It's one that I think as educators, as teachers, we are facing on a daily basis. There are many concerns about the rise in vapes, drugs and just general risk-taking behaviours across the board. How do we tackle this as schools? How, as educators, do we work on this? How do we tackle it? How do we work with communities and families? How do we solve this ever-rising problem? Well, I'm not alone in this today. I know that our listeners, and I've had lots of people reach out via DM and Twitter to say that they're facing these issues within their own schools, and that they've got concerns themselves. And I hope that through today's show, we're going to be able to tackle some of them, get some advice, put our heads together and look at how we move forward, because this issue isn't going away. There is a big rise in the moment across all areas of risk-taking behaviour, and it's one probably as you as a teacher, whether you are a form teacher, a class teacher, pastoral, support, whatever your role, you are probably facing it as well. We know that statistics show that there is an ever increasing pattern of behaviour around particularly vaping and drug taking. For example, we know that children experimenting with vaping has grown by 50% year on year. And we've gone from 1 in 13 to 1 in 9 to now 1 in 5 children experimenting with vaping. Since 2021, the proportion of young people vaping is greater than that of current smokers. which means that by a long shot, vaping has now taken over smoking. And I know from my own experience as a teacher, those issues we used to face around cigarettes just aren't there in the same way. It's all focused on vaping. Now, I'm sure we could sit here and talk about why that's happening. We know that flavours, packaging are being targeted at young people. We know that it's being used as a form of exploitation. And also because they are so cheap to buy, that they are readily available for young people to get hold of. How do we tackle this? What do we do? And also, in terms of our drug taking and the increase in that, we know there are specific issues happening at the moment. I don't think any of us are unaware of the rise in ketamine and cannabis. There are some shocking statistics around that. We know that, for example, there's been reports of over 53% increase in young adults reporting ketamine use since 2022. And we know that according to a Granada report, use has tripled in 16 to 24-year-olds using in the last 5 years. Again, why the rise in this Class B drug? Well, it's cheap, it has a desired effect, it's readily available, but there are huge, huge risks around it. And to hopefully start to unpick some of those today, I'm joined by some very, very special guests. I'm really looking forward to hearing each and every one of their opinions today and hopefully start to unpick some of the reasons why our young people partake in risk-taking behaviours and how we tackle that, not just as individual teachers, not just as schools or multi-academy trusts, but as education across the board. So I'd love to introduce my first guest, John. John, hopefully you will have had an invite. If you click on that invite, you'll be able to join, or if you click on the left hand side to the mic, you should be able to request to speak, and we would love to get your opinions today. To just give a little bit of a background on John, John's a PSHE consultant. He's got years of experience of working in mainstream specialist schools, and obviously he's very au fait with a lot of these issues. So John, I think you are on your phone today, so you should either be able to get you might need to come out and log back on. That might kind of reboot it for you, but if you either if you respond to the request or request the mic, if you are struggling, sometimes it does help to log off and then log back on. John will be joining us today to talk through some of the issues kind of around risk-taking behaviours. Particularly, I'm looking at vaping and drugs, but obviously, what are our risk-taking behaviours? Well, there's lots of them. Obviously, we've got self-harm, we've got alcohol, we've got things like open water swimming at the moment is a big one, and we'll touch on some of those later today, but hopefully John will be able to join us today now. Hi John, how are you?
Hello, Anna.
Hi, lovely to see you. Well, to hear you today, John, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, obviously, you know, the theme of the show today is all around kind of risk-taking behaviours, particularly vapes and drugs, and whether it is getting worse. Do you think that more young people are risk-taking and becoming involved in serious incidents? Oh, it appears we've lost John. How unfortunate. I think he's just dropped out, so hopefully he'll be able to log on really quickly. As I say, John's got years of experience of working with schools, with educators, and obviously as a former teacher himself, he's experienced these issues, but obviously now going into schools up and down the country, he's really well pressed to kind of help us to understand whether this is a growing issue across the board or if it's more localised. Now, I know from my own experience, in Merseyside, we are seeing a real rise in drug taking and in vaping. I don't think that's localised just to Merseyside or to the north at all. I've, working on this show and also been connected through the various organisations I work with. This is a national problem, and we know that. But hopefully, I think that together we are taking this really, really seriously. I think schools up and down the country are addressing these issues and are kind of taking steps really to kind of tackle it. Now, hopefully John will be able to join us now. And John, as I was just saying, obviously, I think schools are acknowledging there are issues and are taking steps to kind of tackle risk-taking behaviour, particularly vapes and drugs. But do you think that there's more young people taking drugs, being involved in risk-taking behaviour than before?
Anna, hi, this is John. I'm not sure if you
Hi,
can hear
John.
me.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. How are you?
I'm furiously pressing buttons trying to be able to
Don't
trying to
worry
work the
at all.
technology.
Don't worry.
Uh,
So I was saying to our listeners about that, I don't think it's just a localized problem. I think that it
yeah,
is a national problem. But what's your experience, obviously, working with schools up and down the country? Do you
sure.
think more young people are risk taking?
Yes, they are. I was really interested when we were setting this up, thinking about some of the questions you were asking. I think we have to acknowledge that the adolescent brain works differently to the prepubescent brain and to the adult brain. And young people won't necessarily see it as risk taking. So we probably need to shift our thinking a little bit on that. There's all sorts of things going on in the brain chemistry and brain structure and so forth that young people won't necessarily perceive it as risk as we would. I guess for millennia, the young bucks and I. Well, I don't suppose I could run across the plains anymore. But the young bucks are saying, come on, John, there's a saber-toothed tiger, let's go and attack. And I say, whoa, hang on a sec, guys, should we just wait for some reinforcements? We perceive things in different ways. But your premise is absolutely right. There is more substance misuse or use and misuse amongst young people. But your question is also a really good one. On the one hand, the national picture is important to know, and is 17% or 23%, is that good, bad, or indifferent? Of young people using or vaping or whatever it might be. But I think we have to look at it at a local level. When we talk to young people, we know that if we say, oh, this is increasing nationally, they kind of go, yeah, right, whatever. Whereas if we say, no, we've done some surveys, we've got public health data from our ward, from this locality, then that becomes far more focused and sharp and relevant and purposeful to them. I think we have to recognise the politics of this. There's been a gradual cut to funding for public health teams and so forth. 10 or 15 years ago, there would have been a PSHE lead or a healthy schools lead in every local authority with support crew. And now there isn't. About half the local authorities no longer have somebody in that sort of public health, we're working with schools role. And yes, ironically, of course, during COVID, we saw a massive increase in the importance of public health teams right the way across the country. So we've got a lack of resource to support young people and teachers. I also have to say, although I'm personally a big fan, we must have, the statutory relationships and sex and health education in there. That the stuff which comes from the DFE at the moment isn't conducive to helping young people either stop or not take part in substance misuse. The focus on knowledge is okay, and young people have got to know. But for example, in terms of alcohol, a lot of people will know this listening, I'm sure. The DFE guidance says that we should teach young people about the legal limit for drink driving, which, as I'm sure everybody knows, I'm not even sure if I can remember the numbers. I think it's something like 30 micrograms of alcohol for every 100 milliliters of breath. And it's different for blood. And that means nothing to me. I suspect it means nothing to young people. But it's safe and easy to teach. And then we can give them a test. And it's different in Scotland. And our focus on knowledge is not enabling young people to make the kind of healthy choices we want them to make. I suppose if you still think you can't get pregnant standing up, there's probably some knowledge that needs to be corrected there. But and in terms of substance misuse, but our focus on knowledge, let's say around, you could teach me to spell gonorrhea, or is it a class A or a class B? That's not the bit that's going to keep me safe, or that's not the bit that's going to enable me to resist unwelcome from friends. So I think we've got to rethink some of our approaches to education. It's really good that we've got a positive space in the curriculum to be able to do that, but we need to think really carefully about the policies or the structures that we have. And it's not just, as I say, lecturing young people, but encouraging them to think and talk. I'll pause for breath. That's a very long answer, which
No,
rambled all over the place.
I
But
think it's really valid, and I think you've made some really good points there. I know myself for primary colleagues and secondary colleagues that are teaching PSHE when it's been kind of it's put into form time, or it's put into kind of, a drop down. How do we contextualize that, and how do we use that when it's so vague in teachings, and how do we make it relatable? And also, like you said, for our young people who don't see it as risk taking, how do we tackle it when unless you are the PSHE teacher and have done specific training, nobody's specialist. So how do we tackle that behavior? Because as he said, how do we reframe it? How do we tackle it?
Oh, yeah, that's huge, isn't it? Just pause, take a step back for a moment. The DfE a couple of weeks ago announced some proposed changes to relationships and sex and health education. And again, they've taken out, there was a key phrase in what we should think of as the current guidance, from 4 years ago. The current guidance talks about the links between health and well-being and children's academic attainment. And I think we should first of all recognise that, if we can improve young people's capacity to manage themselves, manage their emotions, manage their relationships, be less distracted by other stuff that's going on, possibly on social media or substance misuse, then it improves their academic attainment. And then we're developing skills like oracy through a lot of PSHE. So we need to be aware that contribution is there. So I think it comes back down to school leaders to prioritise children and young people's personal development, and through that the PSHE. In schools, it is a strategic decision within the school, as you say, either to have a PSHE team who have dedicated support and training and can access high quality resources and so forth. Philosophically, of course, we're all teachers of PSHE and we're all teachers of relationships, but actually form tutors, on the one hand, I know people work incredibly hard and do a brilliant job, but at the same time, we know that that's unlikely to give young people the really high quality stuff that they need. Form tutors don't often get chance to focus or specialize in that stuff. There's a really important role for form tutors, I think, in terms of pastoral support, but that's not the same as teaching PSHE. So I think there are kind of 3 or 4 things we can do there. One is to prioritise the teaching of PSHE and have specialists doing it. Right, and by specialists, I mean people who get a few years run at it, rather than somebody who's just got a few free spaces on their timetable in secondary. Second part is to recognise the links between children's academic attainment or their well-being and their academic attainment, and it has to be that way round. Just because you achieve well academically doesn't necessarily mean you're physically and emotionally more healthy.
Yeah.
If we can make prioritise children's physical and mental health, then they stand a better chance of achieving academically. And I think also then we need to move away, and schools can do this without subverting the DfE guidance. We can follow the good DfE guidance, whatever it is, and whether there's some changes or not. And actually not just focus on the knowledge, but develop skills and young people's attributes or attitudes, which again was writ large in the current guidance from 4 years ago, but has been watered down a little bit in the proposed changes. So I think, and this has big implications for pedagogy as well. If we're encouraging teachers not just to talk at the children or lecture them or just tell them the difference between the blood and the volume and micrograms, all of that kind of stuff, but or given limited curriculum time. Let's imagine a friend of yours has gone to a party. They've been offered a lift home, but they've seen somebody smoking a spliff 10 minutes ago. What do you think they should do? What should they say? You're going to let them drive home on your own, then, are you? I think there's a lot that we can do. But again, that means a shift from hard-pressed teachers to then work in a slightly different style, which encourages those provocative, thoughtful statements. But if we can do that, we stand a much better chance of moving forward to help young people take those sort of healthy behaviours that we would like them to make.
And I massively agree with that. So I'm a big champion for all staff kind of having that CPD and having that opportunity for that more conversational style with pupils. But I think speaking to some of my mainstream colleagues, especially those that perhaps don't deliver PSHE, and kind of and they were saying to me, but I don't feel comfortable having those conversations because I feel like I'm going to open Pandora's box and not be able to close it, because I've got this limited time. If they start opening up, it just all the safeguarding lights start flashing, and then I can't tackle it in that time, and then sending them off again to another class and running around for the safeguarding lead and trying to get, a support package in place. And so I think there's a fear of having that more and I agree with you. I think it massively needs to be a more conversational style and a different style of teaching for these conversations to be relevant and hit home. But for non-specialist staff, it can be a real kind of red flag because of their own anxieties, because also when our pupils ask questions, if you don't have the answers, and if they ask you, the other one is, around boundaries, because while we create these safe spaces, children's natural curiosity will be, well, have you tried stuff? Well, how can you lecture us if you haven't? And or well, if you, and it can kind of make staff feel really uncomfortable, and to the point where they almost don't want to have these conversations because the professional boundary could be crossed. And so I do recognise that for staff, CPD is massive, but finding that when you've got your own subject specialism, when the day is so busy, it's hard, isn't it? And it's where we find that balance. But I do agree with you on that we need it.
But apart from all that, it's good to go.
Yeah. So
I think
how do we tackle?
those are huge challenges, aren't they? When I have the perfect answer to that, I shall
Yeah.
wave to you from my yacht in the Bahamas. But if you take imagine a secondary school teacher. If I try to jump in with year 10, who've never been used to talking in this way, that becomes incredibly hard. I think we need to gradually build up the culture of that, of the expectation within the class, from year 7 or from whenever the children start in secondary school, and hopefully we're building on the stuff that they should be familiar with from primary school. It's very easy, I know, to talk about ground rules or group agreements, or even, I think, class expectations. Folks, we're going to be talking about some sensitive stuff here, but we're not going to have any personal comments. So how can we either, I'm not going to disclose stuff about me. I don't expect you to disclose stuff about your personal life. How can we talk about stuff we know about without actually saying, I did this or I did that? And again, we'd be looking at distancing techniques, like somebody I know, a friend of mine, I saw this thing, I read, I heard, I saw a thing on the internet. So we're talking at a distance, and teachers need to model that. I think it's really important we also, have a very clear ground rule expectation about we treat other people with respect. That again, we could impose these rules, but good practice would really be to develop it with the students. Does that mean no laughing? Well, no. Something funny we can, but is there a difference between laughing at and laughing with? And we need to be, and perhaps not leap straight in there with something incredibly sensitive, like substance misuse or sex or whatever. Having said that, we could think, oh well, healthy eating, that's pretty non-contentious, isn't it? That can't cause too many problems. But if a child, young person has an older sibling or a parent who's got an eating disorder, all of a sudden that becomes massively sensitive to them. So again, I think we need to be really clear about our ground rules and create that culture or the ethos within the class where we can have a laugh, and sometimes it's useful to do that just to defuse a bit of anxiety from the teacher, never mind anybody else. That we start those conversations in relatively safe spaces, and then gradually, as the students mature and we become more comfortable with it, we allow ourselves to become even into more sensitive or challenging areas. So there's something about the culture of the group which is really important, and if we can get students to police that themselves rather than expecting the teacher to impose that, then that becomes really important.
No, I massively agree. I really do.
So we've got to create those safe spaces. I think teachers do have to have some of their ad libs ready, and I've got some training on this that people are welcome to have a look at if they wish. But so questions like, so have you ever tried alcohol? And have you ever tried an illegal drug? And we've got to be ready to say, look, we've already got our ground rules in place, haven't we? I'm not going to talk about that from a personal perspective, but I've heard some people say this, and I've heard some people, or do you know, when I was a student, I saw this and this. Now, whether that's a true anecdote from you or somebody you know, or something else you've heard, I think is entirely up to you. But I think we've got to make sure that that distance is there.
Yeah.
The other thought that's just flashed into my mind when we're talking about teacher well-being, I saw a thing at the start of the year on one of the paper things, newspaper and adverts, that a school somewhere in the north of England had installed a vape alarm in the school, in the students' toilets, and it went off on the first day 112 times. That was was a bit of a showstopper, I imagine. And then
Wow.
I was talking to a school leader recently. He said, "Oh yeah," he said the head was really busy in August time, and the installers of the vape alarms had come in. Said, "Do you want them in every toilet? Every toilet? Yeah. Oh, just yes." Said the head, every toilet. So they put them in every toilet. None of the student alarms went off, but it went off 10 times in the first hour when the teachers came back. So we've got teachers vaping as well, and I'm not going to criticise people for those personal choices. I think that's indicative of the stress and pressure that teachers feel under. So I think they've put some discreet tape or something over that vape alarm in the teachers' toilets, because we have to recognise the pressures and demands on our colleagues, which are colossal. And that's a big challenge for leadership in terms of how we manage our staff sensitively and compassionately, and still expect high outcomes for children.
Yeah, I think and that's a really good point as well. That obviously, I think it'd be really interesting to do a study on teachers and vaping, and kind of around the increases on that, and whether it does correlate to stress or not. Because it's certainly, we recognise the stresses and pitfalls of the job at the moment, and how teachers choose to unwind and kind of manage that stress. I think would be a really interesting study, and also a really interesting show that
Mm.
it would be good to have you back for. But I think sort of, I mean, you mentioned then about curriculum and starting it early. I think that's another point to make for our primary listeners. Obviously, for lots of our primary listeners, they and teachers, they may have bought into a scheme or whatever else, but it's really important for me that we don't just use schemes to tackle issues. I think be mindful of, kind of like you said, the demographic. We absolutely know some of the worrying statistics, and anyone can do a Google search and find those for themselves. But we know that vaping is increasingly happening with children as young as 9 and 10,
Mm.
and that there's and that the culture of drug use, particularly, and kind of those type of behaviours, is that at younger and younger ages of children are aware of those issues, and whether that's
Mm.
older siblings, issues within the community or family. So I think for primary colleagues as well, it's about tailoring the PSHE offer. Obviously, we have to be mindful of age, of content, but just because we maybe have purchased a scheme doesn't mean we can't go off that scheme if it's to tackle an
Mm.
issue. And using things like the fingertips data to get that data for your specific area
Yeah.
it backs up then to your senior leadership why you need to specifically tackle this issue. But obviously there are some schools who are really reluctant to acknowledge that drugs, vapes, etc., risk-taking behaviours are an issue. Why
Mm.
do you think that is?
Oof. I don't know. I think there would have been a time where all of a sudden, oh my goodness, there's a police car outside. That means something must have happened that's dangerous and scary. Actually, I hope schools have got to the stage now. Yeah, the police have come in, not necessarily to tell somebody off or to arrest a member of staff, hopefully, but because we work in partnership with them, and that's really important that they're one of our regular visitors. Um, Having said that, I think we need to be cautious with police who can be brilliant, but might start somehow about a slippery slope type notion. Oh, every heroin user I found injecting heroin into their eyeballs, they started with a spliff. And actually, that's not quite true, is it? My auntie has a glass of sherry every Christmas. That doesn't make her an alcoholic necessarily, or she's not necessarily going to become an alcoholic. I think also your point is a really good one about the fingertips data. We need to know what's happening, and we must adjust our curriculum accordingly. So very occasionally I'm local authority advisor in Kirklees. In Dewsbury, we have high numbers of adults still smoking cigarettes. The schools there have to do, and vaping, of course, have to do quite a lot of anti-smoking work. 5 miles down the road in the Holme Valley, they are less than the national average for smoking, which is now down to about 8%, I think, of adults. How much time in the curriculum do we need to spend banging on about stuff that young people have already made up their minds about? Now,
Mm.
those young people might have made their minds up differently about smoking cannabis, or as I say, about vaping, but we need to have that intelligence and be able to adjust the curriculum accordingly. I think the other thing, and you pointed it out earlier, is on the one hand, if we've got a quarter of children, young people smoking or vaping, let's say, that is alarming. but that means that 75% of them aren't vaping. And there's some really good research. It came originally from the petrified forest in Arizona. They noticed it was being vandalized. So they put up big notice saying, oh, it's being vandalized and it won't be here in 20 years' time. And the incidence of vandalism actually increased. When they put up notices saying 99% of people or 99.9% of people who come here would never even think about vandalizing it, the incidence of vandalism decreased. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves and with our communities. We know that young people will be smoking cigarettes, although the numbers have dropped significantly. We know that young people may use alcohol, and some people. So, but when we can, and then now is a really important time to be thinking about it. Let's say with year 6, to say when you go up to secondary school, it's easy to assume that everybody's smoking and drinking and having sex. Actually, they're not. And here's some questioning. We've done an anonymous questionnaire with the high school students, and these are some of the things they think. And so we're prioritizing those social norms. We're informing young people of how things really are. It's all too easy. You know, if I've done the school run up until a couple of years ago, I would do the school run, and there were dozens of kids outside my daughter's high school smoking. There were hundreds of them. Well, actually, it was probably about 6 in a bus shelter. And 6 out of 1,500 is probably not too bad. Isn't 6 too many? But you know that's still manageable. But even though I knew about the social norms things, it's very easy to be seduced by. Look at them all; they're all doing it, and of course they're not. So I think we need to be really thoughtful about the use of collecting data, partly to inform the curriculum, but also then to feed back to our students to say most people. Or you know, not. I think if it is most, that's 50. The government will tell us 51% is a majority, but we can feed back to say 99% of our students would do this, they wouldn't do that, they don't, that we can induct or inculcate or drip feed that culture which is against vaping or smoking or having sex or whatever, to remind young people that most young people haven't had sex by the time they're 16. 3/4 of our students choose not to smoke. 99% of our students choose not to use tobacco. And I think that the importance of developing that culture or that ethos within our community, as I say, not just in England or in this borough, but in our school, so we can really start to drive that message home.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. And obviously, for any of the listeners that don't know kind of what fingertips is, it's public health
Mm.
data you can use. But I think that's a really interesting point. And it's one that, I'll be honest with you, as a PSHE teacher, as a leader, and obviously dealing with safeguarding, I will often drill home on the negative statistics. So I'll be like, in my area or in,
Mm.
nationally, this is on the rise, and even today, listeners, I have got a plethora of data that relates to the negatives of risk-taking behaviour, the rise, the spikes, the kind of the increase. But I think that's, John, I think you've made a massive point that I'm going to take away, which is that, okay, there are all these negative statistics, but if you flip that to the positive, we're
Mm.
then creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what we're saying is, okay, this is happening, and I think it would be remiss of us to not tackle it, because if it is an issue in the area, we have to, because otherwise we're not doing our job as educators, and
Mm.
we're not helping our children get the life skills they need.
Mm.
However, within those conversations, we need to focus on the positives as well. So, okay, for example, if I know in Merseyside there's a spike in ketamine, so I will
Mm.
talk to young people about the risks of ketamine. I will talk to them about the dangers of that and the kind of the statistics around that. But then also to flip that and say, well, while these statistics say this, on the other side of it, the statistics shows that this amount of people aren't taking it. And for those
Mm.
young people that aren't taking it, sorry, we need to be mindful that it's not overkill of kind of focusing and drilling down and making them feel like they're part of a community that they're not, but also
Yes.
about celebrating the positive choices that young people are making. Because actually, when we get these issues happening in school, do we automatically go, right? For example, we've had suspicions of substance misuse in school. Right, we need form time focuses, we need assemblies, we need to get, X, Y, and Z in speakers and charities. We need the police, and we do this whole. And I think I speak on behalf of lots of schools that I've worked in, that we do that. We go, right, we've got to put an initiative in, we've got to tackle it. And actually, are we A, doing overkill on it, or B, are we sort of saturating our students with that knowledge? And some of them are sitting there and thinking, well, I've never done this. This has got no relevance to me. Why am I
Mm.
doing another assembly on it? And I think
Yeah.
that's something that I am really going to take away and think about, because it's something that I'd genuinely not thought of before. And I think,
Sure.
I hope for our listeners that, particularly if you're involved in leadership, in scheduling kind of that pastoral focus or those assemblies, maybe think about, are we kind of over egging the pudding? Are we doing too much? Do we need to
Mm.
be more focused and tackle targeted groups or year groups rather than just whole school initiatives that exposes everybody to it? I think
Mm.
that's really interesting. John, I have
Yeah.
absolutely loved speaking to you today. I just wanted to ask kind of,
Yeah.
do you think that there should be more CPD for staff, and what takeaways would you give to staff who are maybe wanting to learn more to be able to
Mm.
support their students?
Just before I answer that, just rewind for a second to your previous point. I think
Yeah.
with schools using social media now, with display boards around the place, it becomes increasingly easy to use the technology to persuade or to remind young people of the truth, which is 9 out of 10 cats aren't doing this or are we need to reinforce those positive behaviours. And that's what coming to our school is, but that's what being a member of our learning community is about.
Yeah.
In answer to the most recent question, Anna, yeah, of course we need CPD. I think there's something really powerful. For so many teachers, both primary and secondary, we are supposed to have all the knowledge at our fingertips. Whether we're teaching column addition or quadratic equations, I'm supposed to know, and I've got to get all this knowledge in my head and out of my head and fill these empty vessels in front of me so they can regurgitate it in an exam one next summer or one hot afternoon sometime. I think within PSHE, we need to shift the pedagogy. And this is coming back to your CPD point. None of us are experts in being 12 or 15 in 2024.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm certainly not. And most of us didn't grow up with the internet in our left hand. I think it's really important when we're thinking about our PSHE is to pose those questions, create the ground rules and have our distancing techniques. So we're not saying what would you do, but what would somebody in your position, or what would a young person, what are the alternatives, so that young people can explore and examine the issues, let's say around vaping. What are the reasons people might choose not to vape? And then, and as a student, I'm listening into that. I think, well, I could never say that. Well, that what they just said wouldn't work for. Well, that what they just said that might work a bit. I'd have to change it a bit. But we're developing that culture within our class where it becomes socially acceptable to say no, or to talk about the health benefits of not vaping or alternative solutions. Um, I think the CPD is absolutely essential in terms of getting teachers to think about their position within the class. Of course, it's our professional responsibility to keep that learning safe and appropriate. But there's no exam in this, and nor should there ever be, I don't think, I hope. I mean, would you want to marry somebody who got a D for personal development? Or a grade 2 for personal development? I hope we don't get to that stage. But if we think about the status of the teacher and encourage or enable young people to speak, to discuss, to question, to challenge respectfully each other. If I'm 15 and I come in with an upskirt photo on my phone and my mates go, "Whoa," there's kudos for me and for them for doing something more about it. If we can get to that tipping point where somebody says, "John, that is somebody's sister. What do you want that for, mate?" And we can get young people to think about some of those things. That's when we really start to get onto a winner.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that. And I think you're right that we do need more CPD, and I wondered what you thought about kind of drugs education in general, because I think more and more for kinds of pastoral support, but also for kinds of our form teachers, etc. Sometimes our children have questions, our
Yeah.
students have questions, and I wondered what your thoughts were on kind of the drug side of it as well, because I think so for me personally, obviously I'm quite involved in this world through the kind of the choices I've made within my kind of
Mm.
educational career. So I feel like I feel quite confident in having that knowledge. But even myself, with the
Mm.
right in different drugs coming through, you're constantly having to
Yeah.
sort of learn a little bit and think about what the effects are and kind of the street names around it. So if you're hearing from a
Yeah.
safeguarding point of view, you're hearing conversations that you might pick up on, or just in general, if kids have got questions, do you
Yeah.
think we need a bit more kind of, does there need to be a more focus on kind of drugs education for staff as well, so that they've got that knowledge?
Yes, there does. There needs to be high quality CPD to support staff. I suspect, because you're absolutely right, as street names change. I remember talking to one group when I was teaching. I was deputy head of a secondary school in Devon in the southwest of England. And I was saying, what are some of the names we've heard for cannabis? And we had blow and skunk and grass, whatever. And one student said, he was a lovely lad, but very academically limited. He said, rabbit shit. I said, is that? Yeah, he said, I've heard some people call it rabbit shit.
No.
And I, exactly. I think the stuff that he'd been smoking perhaps be more herbal than than he'd anticipated. But as the names change, and as you know, then again, it's not about the teacher feeling threatened because they don't know that name or that slang term or whatever. So that's really interesting, isn't it? No, don't talk from a personal point of view. I'm not suggesting you vote, but how might somebody do that? How could they check to say who should you? How could they know that the person they're getting this from is trustworthy? How could they check that it hasn't been laced or spiked? And we talked about spiking a few minutes ago. In terms of numbers, but also, of course, vapes are being spiked now. That's truly
Yeah.
terrifying. And yet there's a danger that we kind of leap onto that shock horror stuff, and we know that doesn't work. The whole sort of just say no campaigns, particularly around drugs, are not effective, are not likely to influence anybody's behaviour. The police tried it with mangled vehicles. You know, they take a vehicle that had been in a crash because they'd been speeding, and they put it at the motorway services, and everybody walking past go, gee, look at that, that's awful. And then we get on, a cup of coffee and go to the loo and come out and put your foot down again. Those shock horror tactics are not going to be effective at a population level. Having said that, I think, as you said, there's a difference between that universal provision, the universal PSHE education, the drugs education that we should be giving to all our students, and of course that needs to be iterative and developmental as we work through the school. But there's a difference then when we're talking one-to-one with young people who may need more individual support, and there's that for some of them it might be appropriate to point out, do you know the dangers of this? Or if you're getting it from somebody you don't know or trust, or it's from a friend of a friend of a friend, then that could be really dangerous. Because
Yeah, I think the way you've framed that is absolutely brilliant. And I think, from my point of view, I definitely think we need to be having some more CPD on it. I think from a safeguarding point of view, keep your ear out for things that, if anything at all, that the young people are speaking about that you think might be a street terminology for drugs, or just kind of raise that awareness. Obviously, report it, follow your safeguarding policies. But I think the more the more schools kind of put emphasis on kind of offering CPD around that pastoral support, around all aspects of that, drugs, alcohol, etc., the more confident staff will feel in supporting pupils and students, and the more robust packages then support those students, but also offer that next level, that next layer of safeguarding. So yeah, I think John, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm
it's a pleasure.
delighted, and you've really honestly given me so much to think about that I'm going to take away and think about within my own practice. And I know I speak on behalf of all the listeners when I say thank you. Please follow John on social media. And John, thank you so much for coming on today. It's muchly appreciated. Thank you.
It's great to talk to you, Anna. Thanks ever so much.
John, speak to you soon.
Take
So
care.
thank you everyone for listening along. This show wouldn't be taking place today if it wasn't for our amazing speakers and for also our amazing sponsors. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles and use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your first order. We are also sponsored today by Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident lifelong learners and readers? Well, join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosson, and the National Literacy Trust Irene Picton. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutions.co.uk to grab your free ticket. Also today, Easy for You, empowering education, where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience. Because by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support and embracing technology, Easy for You isn't just providing tools. They're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school. And finally, Apps for Good, who give schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. Thank you so much. Now, I am also joined by another guest today who I am really excited to speak to. Alex Harris is the head of creative art and technologies, and he is working in a large stream secondary school, and he's been in education for a long time. He's kind of a real expert in different aspects of different schools and different areas, and hopefully if he requests to speak he will be able to join us today, and I'm really excited to have Alex on the show. Good morning, Alex. How are you? Alex, can you
Good
hear
morning.
us?
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. That was fascinating.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex. I'm really interested, really, to hear your take on things, because obviously I work in alternative provision. So my school is quite small, which means that, in terms of kind of addressing risk-taking behaviours, in terms of identifying in the strategies we put in place, it's quite easy for me because it's quite a small school, so we can roll that out quite quickly. But obviously for yourself, working in a large secondary mainstream and as an experienced teacher, are you seeing a rise in risk-taking behaviours? Hopefully you might. Oh, we appear to have lost Alex. Alex will hopefully be able to join us in a minute. I think we're having some technical issues today. So when Alex joins us, if he just presses onto the request, which he has done, hopefully he'll be able to hear us and join us now. Are you there, Al? Hi, Al. Can you hear us?
I've been
I
listening.
think Alex might have. There you go. Hi,
I've been
Alex.
listening. Hiya. I've been
Hi.
listening diligently until the very moment you asked me to say something, and then it all went wrong.
Fine,
So I caught the end of the question about risk-taking behaviours in students.
Yes, because you're a really experienced teacher. Do you think there's a rise in it at the moment?
I think it's hard. That's such a hard thing to quantify, in the sense that I think students have always taken risks. I think they've always taken risks, but the risks might be in different ways depending on the time period, the culture that you grew up in, the location you live. The risks are then different depending on so many different factors. I mean, when I started my career, I worked at a different school, probably a more affluent area than where I work now, and one of the and the drug culture there was quite prevalent. I was ahead of year then at the same place, and I was dealing a lot with drug use. Then I moved over to another school, maybe not such an affluent area, and the risk taking was still there, but possibly in different ways. That was really fascinating listening to John speak, just because of how, from his perspective and the things that he was putting in place, and just listening to the positive side of the statistics was really interesting. I think in terms of risk taking, students are always going to take risks. And in terms of our role and responsibility in schools, we are burdened with the obligation of making sure students have all the information the risks they choose to take are going to have. The problem is, now more than ever, the 5-6 hours we see students a day where we have that contact time with them is very, very minimal to the 20 hours worth of social media, peer time that they spend together, family time. And I think as schools, we can inform, educate, guide in terms of the risks young people choose to take. But there's always going to be that area where students are going to want to push the boundaries. And I think nowadays, in my current setting, through my career, the information students can receive regarding the world around them and the opportunities, both positive and negative, that are available to them is tenfold compared to what it was just 9 years ago when I was at my previous setting. So I think it's really, really hard to say, yeah, students are taking more risks. I like to think that students have always taken risks. They're just doing them in different ways now than perhaps they were. I think when I was training to teach, and my mentor was talking to me about student behavior, and one of the things that has stuck with me my entire career, and I think it applies to risk taking as well, is that students would always want to push the boundaries. It's naturally within them to want to feel and understand how far someone can go before they're in an area where they don't feel comfortable or they feel like they're doing something wrong. It's our job as teachers to help them educate and help them understand where those boundaries are so that they can then build positive relationships, whether that be through behavior management and developing a relationship with a young person about these behaviors are acceptable, but when we reach this point, we're no longer acceptable and there are negative outcomes to that. I think risk taking is exactly the same. I think when we talk about risk taking, we tend to go straight down the line of risk taking is drugs, risk taking is sex, risk taking is bullying or abuse. And yeah, absolutely, those that element of risk taking is dangerous and has really negative connotations and reactions. But risk taking can also be considered really healthy. It's about pushing yourself, about pushing your boundaries. And again, I think as a teacher of PSHE and a teacher of young people, particularly in drama, when you try to create works and schemes of work that makes students question the world around them, it's about embedding healthy risk taking, but also understanding where those lines are and why those lines are there and how those lines help them become happier humans, become better members of our society. So it's such a challenging thing because I don't think as a school you're ever going to be able to scratch beyond the surface of what that student's life is like, what the impact of the people around them will be. All we can do is educate them on the boundaries, educate why those boundaries are there and how they are there to make them a happier person generally.
I think you've raised such an interesting point for me, and it's again, this is why I love this show, because it makes me reflect on my own practice. That I think because I'm so heavily involved in safeguarding, when I
Yeah.
talk about risk-taking behaviours, I instantly think of the negatives. And actually, from what John said before around thinking about kind of adolescent brains and how, and how they process and how and where as they develop, and also like you said about how young people develop, is there an element of risk-taking behaviour that we do need to encourage, that positive, that it's a good, because we see all the time that for a lot of students their resilience is quite low, and actually some risks are positive risks.
Yeah.
And we that we need to reframe this idea, and it's in the title of the show today, but actually rather than saying risk-taking behaviours and putting that stigma that it's always bad, it's maybe reframing it into those kind of positive risk-taking behaviours. and negative risk-taking behaviours, and focusing sometimes on positives of taking a chance, of pushing the limits a little bit, but in a positive, healthy way. For example, if you a risk-taking behaviour might be if you're on a long run and you can feel that you're getting tired, but you think, no, I'm going to push through for another mile. It's a
Yeah.
risk because you're tired and you might get you might get an injury, but there's a positive that you might cover a further distance. And obviously that's a real general kind of one, but that kind of reframing things and risk-taking, to not just have that constant message for young people, risk-taking is bad, but reframe it, like you said, into what are our positive risks and what are risk-taking behaviours, and what, if you take a risk and set up your own company, that can be a real positive. So I think that for me is something that I'm 100% going to take away from today and think about as a teacher myself. Am I just constantly focusing our pastoral on the negative, or do I need to reframe that a little bit myself? And I think that's a massive point you've made. There are some risks, though, that I do want to focus on today.
Yeah, please.
One of them particularly being kind of on vapes. Now, if anyone knows Thomas Michael, or AKA Proudly Pastoral, he did an article recently about vape spiking, and how obviously you can get vapes delivered via Snapchat. We know that there are THC vapes that are that they're part of the cannabis that makes you have that high, and that young people are using them. But we know now that there's also when young people are using social media like Snapchat to get these kind of unspecified vapes, some of them are being spiked with spice and things like that, and are causing quite significant health issues for our young people. But even in general, vapes can be quite a challenge for our schools, particularly secondary, to deal with. And John mentioned there about like vapes and vape detectors and stuff. I wondered what your experience working in a large mainstream was like with vapes.
So vapes, the fundamental problem with vapes is that whilst they were initially brought in as a cigarette replacement to help people come away from cigarettes and the harmful chemicals that can be found in tobacco, the marketing and the advertising of vapes has had a very, very different effect. And I think the cynic in me probably would argue that that was done intentionally. They're fruity flavors. They are shaped like, a lot of them are shaped like iPod packets. They are designed and created, I would argue, to appeal to a younger audience than what they were originally marketed for.
And
I
easy to
think,
conceal as well. So easy
yeah.
to conceal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think within schools in the southwest, we all have vape alarms now, and we all have a sanctioning process for vape alarms. That can range from, sorry, not vape alarms, for vapes. That can range from internal exclusion, that can days suspension, and most extreme cases that can be exclusion. I think we are fighting a battle that can never be won individually. I think we can combat behaviours within our setting, but like you've mentioned, we're not selling them in school. We're not advertising them or marketing to them as positive things that will help you reduce smoking, which is what initially these were designed for. So I think schools are always going to be on a losing battle whilst they are so accessible and easily got outside of our setting. I think for me, the most powerful tool in terms of combating vaping is the idea of reevaluating why we do it, reevaluating why students are choosing to do that. And there is a world on social media now which I feel like is promoting a healthier lifestyle than perhaps when I was growing up, that wasn't necessarily there. The amount of students I speak to now that are openly choosing not to drink, not to do alcohol, not to drink, not to use alcohol, not to smoke, purely because the lifestyle that is being promoted in certain areas of social media is of a healthier lifestyle and the benefits you get from that. So again, it's about promoting the positive and maybe not focusing on the negative. Now, having said that, yeah, we do. I can't imagine there is a school in the country that isn't combating this idea of vapes being used in school and in lessons. I mean, there are times where exclusions across the southwest have happened due to vapes being used in lessons, and I think beyond sanctioning, the only way that we're going to be able to really tackle vapes and the perceived use of them is if we go hand in hand with not just the police, not just your local corner shop where the average 14-year-old knows they can buy a cheap vape. It's about promoting that healthy lifestyle, the benefits of what that healthy lifestyle is, and then alongside homes, families, police, local communities, working together to eradicate the access to these easily got things. I think you make a really interesting point about vapes. Vapes are a gateway now to harder substances, to the THC vapes, to the ketamine vapes. And sadly, a lot of young people are buying these without even knowing what's in them. And that,
Yes.
for me, that's the scariest thing of all. Knowing that I have colleagues in schools in the Southwest that have had children as young as 11 years old passing out through ketamine vapes. And it's scary because they're not buying them because they want ketamine. They're buying them because they like the fruity flavors of a vape. Gives them a little buzz and they carry on with their day. I think until we can work alongside everyone, we move away from this idea that it's a school's responsibility to make students aware of what vapes are and promote not using them. I think it's a much, much broader concept than a school can tackle individually.
So I'm going to jump on a point you've made there, because something really interesting that's kind of sparked my interest a bit. Do you think that there's too much pressure put on schools to tackle these issues in-house rather than externally, in terms of kind of parents, communities, like you said, the shops, the parents, if they're buying them for their children, or if they're condoning it being used? Do you think there's too much pressure put on schools to kind of, will you tackle this problem and fix it?
I think there is is it pressure? Is it expectation? Is it naivety that, well, schools do PSHE, so why wouldn't they combat this? And like mentioned earlier, when we are delivering PSHE maybe an hour a week, an hour a fortnight, and you're trying to, in that hour, you're trying to promote a lifestyle and develop an understanding of the world around them, it's impossible to cover every single element that's going to help that student make the right choices and promote a healthy lifestyle. I think it does need to be broader than schools, and that's not me. I'm no expert. I'm not saying that these things aren't going on. I'm purely talking from a position I find myself in, and the setting I see on a day-to-day basis. But when you're teaching PSHE, and we're very fortunate, we have really inquisitive students where I work, and they will ask questions and they will talk. But there's only so much you can do in the time that you're allowed to do these things. And until that is broadened and that conversation feels bigger than just the hour we get and the lesson across a term that we will cover vapes, we're never going to have the impact that perhaps the outside world would like us to have. We cannot be the sole responsible person to make sure students make the right choices there.
I think that's a massive point, isn't it? I feel like there's been such a growing shift pre-COVID, but certainly post-COVID, for schools to tackle, to be to be that to be that parental support as well, to tackle everything. And it just feels like more and more responsibility is falling onto schools to tackle everything. And while most schools have great pastoral teams and mentors and stuff that will do it, and safeguarding teams that pick things up, in a school like yours that's massive, there's no way you can possibly give that bespoke attention to every single pupil every single minute of the day. There's got to be that balance between home and school. And I think, while we all have high expectations of ourselves as educators, it's got to start at home and in the community. It's got to, we can't possibly do everything. And and I think sometimes that's that sometimes I'm quite lucky, you know, as I say, I work in alternative provision. We have a flexibility with curriculum where we can make things more personalised. But in large schools where you've got, and I'm thinking primary and secondary, where you've got so much to fit in, you've got
Yeah.
so much of a curriculum to cover, you've got exams and statutory testing, fixing every single problem that's come from society is just not doable. It's not feasible to put that amount of pressure on staff. And also, I guess it raises the question of, I think all teachers, and I might be wrong here, but in my opinion, all teachers go on and join teaching the teaching profession to make a difference to students. But I was speaking to one teacher who works in a mainstream who said I came in to teach. I came in to teach my subject and support pupils and students to develop their knowledge and their skills. And yes, part of that is social skills. But I'm not police. I'm not a school nurse. I'm not their parent or carer, and yet suddenly my role is now becoming massively around that as well. And I think it's interesting where teachers are placed in this, in tackling the subjects now, and I think there's a lot of pressure on teachers to have all the knowledge and to be able to tackle all these issues, when actually some teachers just want to teach.
Yeah, and I think that you're gonna send me off on a tangent here about recruitment in education. But I think we do have an obligation. I do think we have an obligation to do our best to educate, inform young people beyond our subject. I genuinely do. We don't sign up. I didn't sign up to be a teacher to just teach drama and performing arts. I signed up to be a teacher because I really enjoy working with young people. I enjoy seeing them become better people over the 5, 6, 7 years I have the opportunity to work with them. Them going away and being able to make informed choices themselves independently. And I think it's a sad indictment of how, I guess, the way we advertise coming into the profession. I think we should be promoting, people should be coming into education with the understanding that, yes, you are a subject teacher, but you're way more than that. And if you're coming into it and thinking, I'm going to come in, I'm going to teach science, I'm going to make 30 scientists leave us and they're all going to go to university and become a scientist beyond me, well, you're in dream world. These young people come with a burden of what's expected of them from home, what's expected of them from peers, what they see on social media. And if you want to be able to do those things, if you want to be able to create future scientists, future actors, future poets and artists, you have to work with the whole student, not just the bit that you want, because you want them to be good at your subject area. It's naive to think you can have an impact on a student if you don't look at the whole student. So I don't think, I think if people are coming into the education system thinking that they are going to be a science teacher and they're going to teach an English teacher and they're going to teach their lessons and they're going to go home, they'll mark the books and they'll make sure that student gets a good grade, it isn't going to happen. It just isn't. Those young people are going to be going through so many different things that you may never know about, that you have to be there to support when the time is right. And that might just be a little bit of a jivvy on, a little bit of a telling off. That might be an arm around the shoulder. That might be contact with outside agencies. But all of those elements are what being a teacher is. I think we're never going to be able to solve all the problems, but we can be there as someone who can support that student through those moments when they hit those points where there is a crossroads to take and there's a decision to make where there could be long lasting impacts.
Yeah, I think that's well. I think you've put it beautifully. And if the government are looking for a poster there on what teaching is, I think you've just put it up beautifully. But you are right. I think we have to acknowledge that our young people are going through more than ever before. And when I was sort of doing the research for the show, I actually spoke to quite a lot of young people about kind of like pupils ranging from kind of like 11 right through to 16 saying, why do you think young people are taking more drugs than ever before? Why do you think vaping has become such a big issue? And they were saying because it's partly coping with the pressures of life, and it's an out, and it's a way to manage that. I guess you've talked about how we have to support our students in making those good choices. How do we move forward then? What, in an ideal world, as more than anyone, obviously, for our listeners who are in similar positions, when you work in a large mainstream like yours, how do we best support our pupils when they're struggling, and if they are involved in substance misuse or heavily vaping, and we're seeing that have an impact on their health and well-being? How do we move forwards?
I think, geez, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I'll just solve that one right now for you.
Or what are
I
your thoughts on how?
I think for me, I can only talk about personal experience. I can only talk about the lessons I have taught, the students I've interacted over my career, and I think the most powerful tool I have found when you're trying to help somebody make the right choices is never to try and make yourself appear like this fountain of knowledge, this person that is going to be able to give you all the answers, to tell you the right path, and then to guide you on that path, and know that you will be successful at the end. I think the most powerful thing I have learned over my career is that sometimes the best way to deal with a situation is be honest and say, I have no idea. I have no idea what the impact of vaping is going to be on your body in 25 years' time. No idea. But we can look at it, we can figure it out together, we can make that choice by researching and developing our understanding alongside one another, with the hope that you are promoting this idea that it's okay not to know. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to find out your own information and make that informed decision yourself. I'm never going to be able to become an expert on every single drug that is available via social media. I'm never going to be able to understand every legislation and policy put in place to help combat drug use and vape use in schools. What I can do is say, well, if you're questioning it, there's something to think about, isn't there? It's clearly unsettled in you. You're not happy with the decisions that you might be seeing made around you or that you are currently making yourself. So let's do some research. Let's look into this. Let's talk about this. Let's go and find someone who can give us some more information. That hopefully instills in them a curiosity that when future decisions come in front of them, it's about making the most informed decision for yourself. Now, they're not always going to be right. Young people will make mistakes on a daily basis, but making mistakes again can be a good thing. Can be a good thing as long as we learn, and you learn and reflect and go away and really think about the process you went on that decision. I've had students in the past make some very, very poor decisions and had to deal with the consequences for those decisions. But what's been really positive is after those moments have happened, they've had the people around them, the support around them, to talk through not just what they did and why they're being punished for that thing, but the reasons those things happened. Why did you choose to use a vaping lesson? Why did you choose to bring that into school? What was the thought process behind that? And then once you start to unpick the bigger picture, all the time, making sure that student knows I am just a person too. I am just a person too. I've also made mistakes down the line, but this is how we become better people, through understanding. And I think, again, John mentioned earlier about when he was talking about the upskirt scenario he put in place about questioning your peers. And it kind of comes back to the first thing I was talking about. It's a huge risk for someone within their social group and within their peers to question why their mates would do something.
Yeah.
We spend as much time talking about the use of like sex education and use of drugs. We spend as much time talking about peer pressure, because for me, the impact of your peers will always have more than the impact of one teacher and 1 hour lesson. So if you can develop learners that are going to risk take by saying, why are you doing that? What is the point of doing this? Why have you brought that into school? That will have more impact than a 1 hour lesson on the harms of vapes.
Yeah, I think that's you've made a real good point there. And I think investing in that kind of culture. I personally, about yourself, I think staff do need more CPD. I think that to be able to kind of have a little bit of knowledge behind the kinds of the drugs and vapes and things that are out there, so that they feel a little bit more comfortable and kind of having them conversations. But I definitely agree with you that I think it is about create also, as well as creating that open culture in school, creating that peer culture of questioning. Then I think that's something that I can reflect on and think, do I do enough of? Is it something? Is it something I can improve on? So, I think, Alex, thank you so much for coming on today. You've been absolutely
You're very welcome.
You've given me so much to think about. And yeah, thank you so much. Really lovely to hear kind of from a secondary school point of view and that large scale of your thoughts on how we tackle things. So thank you very much for joining today. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks. Cheers, Al. So before I move on to sort of my final guest today, I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody that's listening along today. Whether you're listening live now or whether you've downloaded this, we are really grateful to have you listening along. But this show wouldn't be anything without two things. One, it's our speakers and our listeners. And two, it's our sponsors. A huge thank you to our sponsorship teams today. Firstly, we've got John Catt. And this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers. They publish professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. And you can visit them today at johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your first order. Big shout out also to Reading Solutions, Easy for You, and Apps for Good as well. Thank you so much to everybody for your support. Now, as my final guest today, I'm going to be speaking to a gentleman called Stephen Melling. Stephen is an advocate and champion for mental health and recovery. He works with numerous organisations from schools, charities, and the NHS, and hopefully he's able to join us today because I'm really interested in hearing your perspective. Hopefully, Stephen, you're there.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Anna.
Thank you for joining us today, Stephen. As I just mentioned to our listeners, obviously, your work is around the impact of addiction and mental health issues. And you work obviously a lot with a lot of organisations to kind of challenge that stigma and to educate on how we move forward. So thank you so much for joining today. I'm really interested in hearing your point of view, Stephen, obviously, Steve, because you yourself obviously are in recovery, and as a parent, I'm really interested in hearing sort of what role you think education plays in addressing the issues.
Okay, so yeah, sorry I jumped on a little bit late. I've been out for a run this
No
morning,
problem.
so I was scrambling back to the car.
No problem.
But I caught the back of the conversation off the last gentleman. Around so for me, I really do believe that vaping now for the young children is almost going to be the new gateway into other addictions. So it used to be like cigarettes or marijuana, and it used to lead on to different things. I think vaping now very quickly is taking up that gateway of trying new things, and it's going to become a real big problem. And in regards to the risk taking, there's no evidence of what vaping is actually doing, and in years to come we'll probably have a pandemic of problems. But for me, it's education. So as a parent myself, I struggled with addiction and mental health problems for 20 plus years, and my role as a father to my eldest son, 17 years of age, at the age of 15, I started to talk to him about my experiences, my life, the problems that drink and drugs obviously brought to myself, just to educate him about, I'm talking to my son about real life things because I don't want him to make the same mistakes. Whilst education is good about the harms of what drink, drugs, or vapes can do for you, I really think that when the children are being spoken to by somebody with lived experience about the real downs of continuing on the path of doing the things that they're doing, it seems to sink in a little bit. Now, my son doesn't drink at all. That's through his own choice. I've had adult conversations with him from a young age. My 14-year-old son will do the same. And I think it's really important for me to be open and honest with them, because I've been down the wrong path for such a long time, and it's caused some serious problems in my life. And I feel like I have to share that to them for them to be educated enough to make the right decisions when it comes to the likes of drinks, drugs, and also
Yeah,
vaping.
I think you've made
So
a
I,
really interesting point there about lived experience. Do you think schools need to do more of that, of inviting, because when there is issues, inviting speakers in, obviously, kind of
yeah,
getting that lived experience voice into that kind of
yeah.
education?
Yeah, 100%. And this is whether it be in schools or whether it be in treatment centres or rehabs or workplaces, wherever I go into and I talk about my story, where it took me and how I've turned it around. The room silences and it listens, and I've always been, I do volunteer work for a rehab facility, for probation service, and whilst there always is that sort of them and us type of attitude, so the kids are looking at the teachers and they're the them, and I've always seemed to fit people with lived experience seem to sit in between the service user or the child in the school or the employee and the employers and the staff members or the teachers, and they tend to listen. They speak to me openly as well, about their own issues and things that are troubling them. And for me, I think a lot of the kids will be reaching out for vaping now is because they're looking at other kids who are doing it and going, I want to be like them, or I
Mm.
want to be accepted by them, or I want them to like me. That's how I started. I started years ago, drinking because that's what other people were doing, and I had some emotional neglect as a child, and I wasn't getting what I needed from at home. So I was looking externally for it. So I was looking around the wrong crowds of people. I wanted to be like, so I'll do what you're doing. The peer pressure was there because if you weren't doing something, but why aren't you? Okay, then I'll do it. And it's somebody talking to the classroom and saying, listen, I've been there. I know how you may feel on a daily basis. I know that there's loads of kids to be vaping. They don't want to, but they're doing it just purely to fit in. And then after a period of time, that then becomes an addiction because of the nicotine, and then they're stuck in that trap. And then from there, where do they go? Ketamine, massive problem these days, absolute massive problem, and it's destroying our youth. And things need to be done about it. The kids need to be focused on this, um, because that leads to things. Um, if they get there, because I know young people who are absolutely dying of ketamine.
We're just having a little,
18, 19,
we're just having a little bit of technical problems there. I don't know if it's just my end, if it's just being a little bit muffled, Steve. But I think you've made a really good point there around kind of around education and around kind of I think feeling like you need to fit in, and we've touched on it a little bit around kind of young people and using it as a tool, whether it's vaping, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, although we're seeing a decrease in alcohol use, just around kind of using it to kind of block out those issues that they're facing. I think our young people are facing um, more issues than ever before, really. And I suppose you make a really good point there that for some young people, it is just about it's a peer issue, isn't it? And
mm,
wanting to fit in and wanting to be part of that kind of cohort. And also, I spoke to some young people myself around kind of um, what their reasons were for why they thought young people were kind of increasing in drug taking and vape usage. And they were saying, well, because it blocks things out, it's a release,
yeah.
it kind of it relaxes us. And so, from your own experience, and obviously as a parent, do 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 you think we need then, if this is an issue and we're facing it, do we need a stronger kind of a stronger program of drugs education in schools?
100%. I believe that we need to have a stronger mental health program in
Mm.
schools, life skills program in schools, drug and alcohol, sex education. I think all of that needs. I genuinely do think it needs to be a lot stronger. It needs to be a lot more in detail. I think you know, a lot of people are too frightened to talk about our kids about things which they believe is too
Mhm.
sensitive for young ears. Well, you know, I wish somebody. I started drinking at 14 years of age, and I was going home, and I wasn't being questioned by my parents. I wish somebody sat me down at 14 and said to me, "Listen, you know, this could potentially be a problem, and this is where it leads to." Somebody sat in front of me with lived experience to show me that that they've lost everything, you know, everything, relationships, children, houses, cars, businesses, lost it all through making wrong
Would
choices.
you, as a parent, obviously, you've got your own lived experience of addiction, and it's a very powerful one, and that voice of hearing that, and saying we need more of it, I agree with massively, because I think, although, like, Alex and John said, we've got PSHE in the curriculum that does cover things. Sometimes it's a little bit
Mm.
wishy-washy. Sometimes it's not programmed in as kind of as much as kind of as it should be. As a parent, would you want your children to have more experiences and talks from people with lived experiences, so that to cover those issues?
Yeah, well, yes, because it's people with lived experiences who'll be able to give real life stories about the potentials and the risks. And now, when it's taught, when things are taught from a textbook, something as serious as this, whilst it has an impact, whilst there's some education and stuff in there, it's like, so for me. You know, I've been through counselling a lot of my life, and when I've been to see a counsellor who is an academic who's been through university and have learnt mental health or psychiatry or whatever it might be, um, and then I've gone to see a counsellor who's got lived experience, but then also trained in that field. 1,000,000% the counsellor with the lived experience who's also trained in that field talking to me, it's
Mm.
different. It is just different. You can gel easier. It's just completely
So
different.
how
And
do
I
we
think,
deal with that then as teachers? Because obviously some teachers may have lived experiences, some may have lived
mhm,
experiences that obviously they're not going to share with young people. How
yes,
how do we as teachers navigate? Because we can get speakers in, and I think you raise a really good point, the more the
yeah,
better. But what advice would you
yeah.
give for teachers who are going to tackle these subjects? Because obviously it's in the curriculum, and they're the form teacher or the pastoral. What advice would you give?
So 100%, I would look at getting people in with lived
Yeah.
experience to talk about whether it be about drink, drugs, or other important subjects. Getting people in with lived experience. Now, workplaces are employing people with lived experiences. The NHS employ people with lived experience for certain jobs. It's a big thing at the moment. Getting people in with lived
Mm.
experience. Now, I don't know how comfortable a teacher would who does have lived experience about talking about their stuff to students. So that's why I think it's better to bring people in from the outside who can come in and
Yeah.
talk about their stuff, to keep obviously the teacher safe and keep their lives confidential to the
I think you make a
students.
good point there as well, that actually support for staff who may be struggling with recovery or addiction as well, because we touched on it before
Yeah,
earlier on about staff. John, our speaker, was mentioning about staff vaping in toilets for their own stress and stuff. I think making
yeah,
sure that schools, and it's something I'm going to take away from today, making sure schools are supporting staff who are struggling as well.
yeah. And that's so what I'm currently working with at the moment is I'm going to be working with the NHS, working with other services, and then also businesses, because obviously an organisation has a legal duty to protect their staff's well-being, you know, to look after their staff. And you know, we want to be going in and talking to staff members of teachers, doctors, nurses, people in the NHS, workplace, about our
I think
well-being,
that's
because
really
I know that
important,
you
isn't it? Is to think about is well-being and
yeah,
staff well-being, and obviously, are
yeah,
is staff well-being good? Is students well-being good? And if staff are having to tackle challenging subjects within, addiction and recovery, even if it's not their own lived experience, are they comfortable doing it? And I think,
yeah,
I think you raise a really good point there, and it's something I've not considered before, around kind of,
mm,
are staff comfortable tackling these subjects, not just for the information and the CPD and the training, but also from their own mental health point of view. And yeah, I think you've raised such a good point that I'm gonna take away and think about.
So it just a quick one, Anna. So what's it called? So for me to be the best father that I can to to my children, I have to be in the best place that I possibly can be, mentally, physically, emotionally. So I have to do the right things every single day to make sure I'm in that
Yeah,
place to be able to support my service users, to be able to be the best father to my children. Teachers need to be in the best possible headspace, mentally, physically, emotionally, to be able to offer the best support and teaching for the
yeah,
children. And then they will get the best version of the teacher if their well-being is being protected. Now I know that so many services out there are stretched and struggling, and the pressure and the stress, people are
yeah.
suffering, and then ultimately the children suffer
No, I
too.
think that's a really good point. And I would sit here and talk to you all day about how services are funded
Yes.
and how we need to do more. But unfortunately, listeners, we have run out of time. But Steve, I would love to have you on another show to talk about how we do that further and how we support things. And I think
Fab.
for anybody listening today, I just want to say a massive thank you. Firstly, for listening along with me today, but also to all the guests as well for their fantastic information. I think John, Alex, and Steve have raised such good points around data and how we tackle things, and how as parents are asking for support and wanting, and that we need to think about lived experiences and are wanting our young people to have the skills and the mindset to be able to make positive choices. And I think that this is absolutely something today that I'm going to take away and think about. Obviously, for yourselves as educators, we need to think about safeguarding, always paramount. We need to think about well-being, not just of our students, but of ourselves. But thank you to everybody for listening today. I hope that you take something away from today. I know I certainly will. Huge thank you to everybody for listening today, and also to our speakers, Stephen Melling, Alex Harris, and John Rees. Please give them a follow on social media. And thank you very much, and I will see you all soon. Thank you. Take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.